Part 2. What to vary and how to schedule it. Part 1 settled that we should vary practice. Now we get specific, and there are really two separate decisions hiding inside vary your practice. The first is a what question. Of all the things you could vary, which ones should you? That depends on the type of skill and on a distinction we'll draw between two kinds of conditions. The second is a how question, and it's the deeper one. Once you've picked several variations to practice, in what order do you arrange them across a session? Block them together or mix them up? That ordering question opens onto the single most important and most counterintuitive idea in this chapter, the contextual interference effect, where the schedule that produces the worst-looking practice produces the best learning. We'll build it carefully, define it, look at the evidence across beginners and experts, confront why it feels so wrong, mark its limits, and then explain why it works. This is the part of the chapter most likely to change how you actually run a practice session. Let's start with the what, and the first step is to look not at practice, but at the test.
The first move in deciding what to vary is surprisingly not to look at practice at all. It's to look ahead at the test, the future situation where the skill will be used. We've said it before, and it governs everything here. Effective transfer is a function of how similar the practice and the test are. Similar in the skill itself, in the context surrounding it, and in the kind of thinking it requires. So the test situation is your blueprint. Ask, when and where will this person actually perform this skill? And what about that situation will vary? A free throw will always be the same distance to the same height rim. That part won't vary. But the crowd, the score, the pressure will. A golf shot, by contrast, comes from a different lie and distance every single time. A tennis return is different on every serve. Once you've honestly characterized what will and won't change at test time, your practice design falls out of it almost automatically. Build in variety wherever the future will demand variety, and hold constant whatever the future will hold constant. So before you decide what to vary, study where you're headed. The next two slides give you the vocabulary and the rules for doing exactly that.
To decide what to vary, you need a distinction from Gentile that we met early in the course, regulatory versus non-regulatory conditions. Regulatory conditions are the features of the environment that the movement must directly conform to. They regulate, they shape the movement itself. The surface you walk on is regulatory. You move differently on ice than on sand than on dry concrete. The speed and spin of an incoming serve is regulatory. It dictates how you swing. If you get the movement wrong relative to these, you fail. Non-regulatory conditions are everything else in the environment that doesn't directly shape the movement. The buildings around the path, the lighting, the crowd noise. They don't change how you move, but, and this matters, they can still influence your success, because as we learn studying memory, we incidentally absorb the surrounding context. So the rule for what to vary is clean. Vary in practice whatever will vary at test. If the regulatory conditions will change at test, vary them in practice. If the non-regulatory ones will change, vary those too. The two terms give you a precise checklist instead of a vague instruction to mix it up. And exactly which ones change depends on whether your skill is closed or open, which is the next slide.
Now let's turn that distinction into concrete rules, organized by the kind of skill, because what you vary genuinely differs across them. 3 cases. First, a closed skill with no intertrial variability. The regulatory conditions are the same every time. A basketball free throw. Same rim, same distance, every shot. Climbing the stairs in your own home. Same stairs daily. Here, keep the regulatory conditions constant in practice. Don't move the free throw line around, but vary the non-regulatory conditions, because those will change. Practice with crowd noise, with fatigue, with game pressure. Second, a closed skill with intertrial variability, like a golf shot with a 7-iron, where the lie, the distance, and the slope differ every time even though it's the same club. Here you vary both regulatory and non-regulatory conditions, because both will be novel in a match. Third, an open skill, returning a tennis serve, where every attempt is genuinely unique and the environment is in motion. Here, by necessity, you vary everything. A wide range of regulatory conditions that change attempt to attempt, plus the non-regulatory ones. So the type of skill tells you which dials to turn. Now, to the harder, more interesting question. Given several variations to practice, in what order do you schedule them?
Here's the scheduling question, and I'll make it concrete with the textbook's example. Imagine you're an elementary PE teacher with a 6-day unit to teach 3 throwing patterns: overhand, underhand, sidearm. Same total practice for each. The only thing you control is the order. There are 3 basic ways to arrange them. Blocked practice, you do all of one variation before moving to the next. 2 full days of overhand, then 2 of underhand, then 2 of sidearm. Everything about one skill, then everything about the next. Serial practice, a fixed repeating order: overhand, underhand, sidearm. Overhand, underhand, sidearm. Predictable, but constantly switching. And random practice, the 3 variations in an unpredictable order: sidearm, overhand, underhand, sidearm, sidearm, overhand. You never quite know what's next. I want to stress, all 3 involve the exact same amount of practice of each throw. Nothing changes except the sequence. It seems like it couldn't possibly matter much. Surely a throw is a throw, however you order them. That intuition is wrong, and the size of the effect is one of the genuine surprises of motor learning. These 3 schedules sit at different points on a single dimension, and that dimension is the next slide.
That ordering dimension has a name: contextual interference. The term comes from William Baddick, and it refers to the interference, the memory and performance disruption, that results from practicing multiple skills or variations together within the same context. Think of it as how much the variations interfere with each other in your memory during practice. And it lives on a continuum. Blocked practice is low contextual interference. You stay on one variation, so there's little interference and practice goes smoothly. Random practice is high contextual interference. You're constantly switching, the variations jostle each other in memory, and practice is messier. Serial sits in between. Now, the effect itself, and here's the twist that overturned decades of assumption. Researchers used to assume interference is simply bad, that low interference, smooth, blocked practice would produce the best learning. The contextual interference effect is the finding that the opposite is true. High contextual interference, the random schedule, produces better learning, better retention and transfer than low interference, even though, and this is crucial, it produces worse-looking performance during practice. The founding motor study by Shea and Morgan showed exactly this. Random practice was worse during acquisition, but better on retention and transfer. Worse now, better later. Let me show you that this isn't just a lab curiosity. Let me convince you this is real, because it's so counterintuitive that one study isn't enough, and the evidence spans beginners and experts, the lab and the real world. Start with beginners learning an actual sport. Goad and McGill had college women with no badminton experience practice 3 serves: short, long, and drive. One group practiced them blocked, one practiced them randomly. Same total trials. The random group beat the blocked group on the retention test, and then came the striking part. On a transfer test, serving from the other side of the court, the random group showed essentially no drop-off, while the blocked group fell apart, performing about as poorly as they had on day 1. Blocked practice had built a skill that couldn't adapt. Now experts, Hall, Dominez, and Cavazos took skilled baseball players and gave them extra batting practice against fastballs, curves, and changeups, either blocked, 1 pitch type per day, or random, all 3 mixed each day. On a game-like test with pitches in random order, the random hitters outperformed the blocked ones. Same effect, opposite ends of the skill spectrum. And it's been shown in tennis, volleyball, rifle shooting, even cake viewing and handwriting. This is not a fragile finding. It's one of the most robust phenomena in the field. Which raises the obvious question: if random practice is so much better, why doesn't everyone already do it? Because it feels terrible.
Here's why, despite all that evidence, blocked practice remains everywhere. It feels better, and feelings during practice are deeply misleading. There's a wonderful study by Simon and Bjork that gets right at this. People practiced several movement timing sequences, blocked or random, and periodically were asked to predict how well they do on a test the next day, a measure of their judgment of their own learning, what researchers call metacognition. The blocked group, who performed smoothly in practice, confidently predicted they'd do well, and then underperformed on the test. The random group, who'd struggled visibly in practice, predicted their test performance accurately. Think about what that means. Blocked practice doesn't just produce weaker learning, it actively fools the learner into believing they've learned more than they have, because they use their smooth practice performance as the gauge.
This connects straight back to our chapter on performance versus learning. What you see during practice can badly misrepresent what's actually being learned. So the practical warning is blunt. Do not trust the feeling of a practice session. Smooth, successful, confidence-inspiring practice can be the sign of weaker learning. The retention test tells the truth. The practice session lies. Now, in fairness, contextual interference is not magic and not universal. It has real limits, which we need to mark.
Let me be honest about the limits, because always use random practice would be too simple. There are two kinds of limits: task and learner. On the task side, contextual interference helps most when the variations you're mixing are genuinely different. In the language of an earlier chapter, controlled by different generalized motor programs with different underlying timing patterns. Mixing 3 quite different badminton serves, big benefit. Mixing versions that differ only slightly, like the same movement at different speeds, little or no benefit. The more dissimilar the variations, the more interference helps. On the learner side, children and low-skilled beginners often do not benefit from the highest levels of interference. For them, too much randomness early can overwhelm, and lower interference, or a progression that starts low and builds toward high, tends to work better. That idea has a name: the challenge point. You want to match the difficulty of the practice to the skill level of the learner, so they're optimally challenged, not overwhelmed and not bored. Less interference for beginners and hard tasks, more as skill grows. And one practitioner's rule worth remembering: aim for a moderate to high amount of interference, but adjust based on how people do on retention and transfer tests, not on how they look in practice, which, as we just saw, will lie to you. So why does any of this work? 2 explanations.
So, why does scrambling the order produce better learning? 2 hypotheses, and the nice news is they're complementary, not competing. The evidence supports both. The first is the elaboration hypothesis from Shea and Morgan. In random practice, all the variations are live in your working memory at once, so you naturally compare and contrast them. How is the overhand throw different from the sidearm? That comparing makes each variation more distinct and builds a richer, more elaborate memory representation, which is easier to retrieve later. Blocked practice, where you only ever think about one thing at a time, never prompts that comparison. The second is the action plan reconstruction hypothesis from Lee and McGill. In random practice, by the time a variation comes around again, the intervening trials have made you partly forget the plan you built for it, so you have to reconstruct that action plan from scratch. It's like a math problem. If I ask you to add the same long list twice in a row, the second time you just recite the answer. But if I make you solve other problems in between, you've forgotten it and have to genuinely resolve it. That effortful rebuilding, trial after trial, is hard in the moment, but is exactly what cements learning. Elaboration says you build a better memory. Reconstruction says you do more real work each trial. Research suggests both are happening. Both come down to the same theme: harder practice, deeper learning.
Let me recap part 2, the engine room of this chapter. The what: let the test situation tell you which conditions to vary, using the regulatory versus non-regulatory distinction, and the type of skill. Closed without intertrial variability, hold regulatory constant and vary non-regulatory. Closed with intertrial variability, or an open skill, vary more or everything. The how: schedule practice using contextual interference. A random schedule, high interference, outlearns a blocked schedule, low interference, on retention and transfer. For beginners and for experts, in the lab and in real sports. The catch is that it feels backwards. Blocked practice feels smooth and breeds false confidence, so trust the retention test, not the practice session. Contextual interference has limits. Ease children and beginners in, and match the challenge to the learner. And so far, the whole chapter has pushed one direction: vary, mix, make it harder. Now part 3 introduces what looks like the exact opposite principle and shows you why it doesn't actually contradict any of this.